The Iran war turned hot in a dramatic escalation Sunday night. Let's get right to it. Alex, you had Hezbollah targeting Israelis across the border, followed by an Israeli airstrike on the Dahia neighborhood of Beirut. Afterwards, Iran got involved in retaliation for the Beirut strikes, firing a total of 24 ballistic missiles at the state of Israel. The Houthis also got involved, targeting Israel early on Monday morning. There was an Israeli counterstrike, including hitting military bases, a truck-based missile launcher, and a petrochemical factory in Iran. Allegedly, the site produced ballistic missile material. And then you had the de-escalation efforts. President Trump saying that both sides needed to back off and stop. And right now, we have once again a fragile ceasefire. The Houthis continue to fire against the state of Israel. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but it's been a pretty hectic period here. Really just 12 hours if you combine everything into one.
Exactly. You know, back in June of over a year ago, we had the 12-day war, and it seems like last night or Sunday night, Monday, we had the 12-hour war where it felt like we could have been back into a major escalation. Obviously, it was an escalation. The first time since President Trump declared a ceasefire that we saw Iran firing ballistic missiles at Israel. They fired 24 ballistic missiles at Israel, including at Haifa, at the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And then for the first time since the ceasefire, Israel retaliating deep inside Iran. As you mentioned, there were hits on a petrochemical facility, demonstrating that Israel could hit at energy-related facilities. You mentioned that this has also to do potentially with the ballistic missile production. Perhaps this was one of the factories where Iran is making the fuel or even the solid-state fuel for ballistic missiles. There are reports of targeted assassinations of heads of IRGC and also missile defense systems, which it's believed that some of these could be Chinese air defense systems that had been delivered in the aftermath of the ceasefire. So, you know, Israel striking very hard and also doing it without the United States. So Iran showing that it's not going to listen to the United States. It's already been firing at 8 countries since President Trump declared ceasefire. Israel also not heeding the warnings of President Trump and recognizing that it needs to defend its sovereignty and is willing to hit deep inside Iran at strategic targets, even if Trump doesn't give the green light specifically, and even if Trump doesn't give U.S. assistance to those efforts.
I want to talk about why this happened now. You had Israel striking in the Dahia neighborhood of Beirut, but Hezbollah has been striking against northern Israel pretty much every day for the last several weeks. Israel's been retaliating. What is so special about Dahia that caused Iran, by the way, to actually threaten? They said to the Israelis on Sunday night, they said to us, look up in the sky, you'll see what's coming. And then Iran struck. Like, why is Dahia so special to them?
Well, they have consolidated and set up Dahia as the epicenter of their command and control of Hezbollah. And what we're seeing is that Iran has been demanding of Trump in the ceasefire talks that that Israel and Hezbollah war has to stop as part of the larger ceasefire. And that is a preservation attempt. Iran wants its most forward-facing and strongest proxy, Hezbollah, to survive and to remain as a direct threat to Israel. So they're demanding of Trump that he put the brakes on Israel and not have Israel attack Hezbollah in their new headquarters. So this is what's been happening. And what you've seen as a result of this, especially in the last 24 hours, you had Ambassador Yechiel Leiter, and maybe we can bring up this post on X, where he is trying to de-link Hezbollah, the Israel-Hezbollah conflict, from the U.S.-Iran conflict, even though they are absolutely linked, right? Because Hezbollah is, like it or not, an Iranian proxy. And what you've basically seen here, and we have to even zoom out before what happened with these strikes between Hezbollah and Israel as the precursor, but what has really been going on since President Trump declared the ceasefire? So if you zoom out, and you go back to those 6 weeks, what did we see? We saw that Israel and the United States absolutely pummeled Iran. They took out the supreme leader. They took out senior commands of the IRGC. They hit the missile defense, the air defenses. They hit the missile production. They hit all of the major nuclear facilities. And Iran was firing back ballistic missiles all over the Middle East at 11 different countries. Many of them went to Israel, but not all of them. In fact, I think even more missiles were sent towards the United Arab Emirates and other countries than Israel. And what all the allies showed is that they could absorb all of the hits of Iran, but Iran was getting absolutely pummeled. So at the end of those 6 weeks, if you would judge the conflict right then and there, you would say that certainly, Iran comes out on the losing end of this, even though there were many analyses suggesting that the United States and Israel ended early and they could have kept going and pushed Iran even further. But then the ceasefire was declared. It was clear that Trump wanted, after 6 weeks, the regime was still there. Trump wanted to see, who it was who he was talking to, how desperate that regime was to actually get to the end of conflict, whether they would be willing to give up on the nuclear ambitions, whether they would be willing to open up the Straits of Hormuz in exchange for a permanent end to conflict and potentially some money for rebuilding all the damage. But what have we seen? In that period, since Trump declared that ceasefire, Iran is trying to regain its standing in the conflict. So, during the war, Iran losing. During this period of negotiations, Iran is really demonstrating to President Trump that it is willing to game against him. They keep taking a step forward. They keep taking a step back. They show some kind of a willingness maybe to open the straits, but then they don't. Then they fire at ships in the Persian Gulf, going through the Straits of Hormuz. And what you see is that we're now even more time since that ceasefire was declared than you were actually in the battle. And the Iranians are trying to play Trump for a fool in the negotiations. And it's weird because the president had said many times in the past, we've talked about it on this program, that Trump has acknowledged that the Iranians have never won a war and never lost a negotiation. Right. And they are trying to beat him in this negotiation. So what has happened now more recently is that they are really trying, I believe, to humiliate the president. And how are they doing that? Number one, by just escalating a little bit, by making it harder for ships to get through the Straits of Hormuz, testing the U.S. blockade, sending an Iranian ship towards the Kharg Island, which then the United States Navy disabled that ship. Okay, and then in retaliation for that, Iran fires at Bahrain, at oil facilities in Bahrain, and also they shoot at the Kuwait National Airport, and they hit that with a drone, causing significant damage to the terminal, killing one person. And then at the same time, what they've been doing is pushing their proxy, their primary proxy, which is Hezbollah, to be continuously escalating against Israel and forcing Israel into a situation where it is going to not only retaliate, but escalate its retaliation, because Israel's doctrine has changed. They say, we don't play any more tit for tat. You fire at us, we fire back 10 times as big. So what happens is that they're using the Hezbollah attacks on Israel to draw an Israeli escalation, and then they are saying in Iran, well, if you hit against Dawiya, which is where the Hezbollah headquarters is, then we're going to attack against you. And then, of course, Israel cannot tolerate an attack direct from Iranian territory, so Israel responds back. Meanwhile, Trump is telling the Iranians to stop. They're telling the Israelis to stop. They're trying to broker an Israeli-Lebanese normalization agreement or non-aggression agreement, however they're calling it right now. Trump just telling everybody to stop, but Trump's wishes here are not necessarily aligned with the reality of the players in the greater conflict.
Yeah, I don't know what Trump's saying privately, but certainly, as you said, publicly, he's telling Iran and Israel, as he said yesterday, to immediately stop shooting. He also expressed his displeasure with Israel's strike in Beirut. Let's check out this clip.
I just got off the phone with President Trump, who is following the developing situation across the region. He told me what I would suggest to Iran. You've shot your missiles. That's enough. Get back to the table and make a deal. I asked him about those initial IDF strikes that took place earlier today. He told me they were not coordinated with the United States, and I asked him for reaction to the Israeli strikes against Hezbollah in Beirut, and President Trump said, "I'm not happy about it."
That being said, Alex, Trump did not tell Netanyahu not to attack Iran. And hopefully we'll see that here in a clip in just a second. But he said he wants both sides to stop as quickly as possible. Let's check it out.
We had a very good conversation, and he was hit, and he hit back. And I can't blame him for that. They both agreed through me to stop. And we're in the final throes of what will be a very, very good deal that will not allow in any way, shape, or form nuclear weapons, etc. And the Strait will open up right away. It'll open up immediately upon signing, which could be in 2 or 3 days.
So, Alex, there was news out there indicating that President Trump told Prime Minister Netanyahu, in no uncertain terms, should you attack Iran. And now we have at least several clips of the president not saying that he did not tell Netanyahu to strike Iran, but after a while, in this case, several hours, he then said stop.
Right. I think what you're seeing here is how does this war play out in the media and in the posts on Truth Social and on X, from all sides, and how is this actually playing out in behind closed doors diplomatically. And we have every indication that even though Trump did not want necessarily for Israel to strike in Dawiya and in Beirut, that Netanyahu explained very clearly to the president that they could not allow these escalations from Hezbollah to continue without striking the Hezbollah headquarters in Dawiya, and also explaining, therefore, that the chances of getting to an actual normalization agreement with Lebanon increase the more you disable Hezbollah's abilities. And the same thing with the strikes against Iran. President Trump obviously would have preferred if Israel would just have absorbed those strikes. But Israel understands that when you allow Hezbollah to strike without retaliating, what you're doing is creating a new reality where they understand that they can continue to strike without being penalized for that. And the same thing with Iran. So Netanyahu explained that there's no way they can possibly allow 24 ballistic missiles to be fired into Israeli territory without Iran suffering a very, very significant price for that. Now, the price that they absorbed, that wasn't the full price. Okay, there are reports that Israel was preparing planes for a massive retaliation operation inside Iran. And
they might have even been on the runway.
Exactly. We've heard that they were on the runway, but then we've also heard reports that when the chiefs of the Air Force saw that Trump said that he was going to tell Netanyahu to stop, that they even pulled back before that conversation with Netanyahu even happened, because they understood that they weren't going to get a green light. But Netanyahu and the Air Force were preparing for a massive, massive retaliation. So what you see, what Israel did, it was somewhat symbolic. You compared to what could have been. I think Israel was very much prepared to go back toward a situation of all-out war with Iran, but clear that Trump doesn't want that. Now, at the same time, if Trump actually wants to get to a negotiated settlement, I think what Netanyahu did by striking deep inside Dawiya next to Beirut and suburbs of Beirut, and striking deep inside Iran, and we saw that there were explosions in Tehran and some of these targeted assassinations, it actually makes a negotiated deal more likely. Like what Iran had been trying to do in spacing out these negotiations was making it less and less and less likely that Trump would return to military conflict, and making it increasingly likely that Iran would increase their demands in the negotiations. When Israel actually puts the military pressure directly on the Iranian regime, that is what makes the Iranians more fearful and more desperate to actually get to the table and to sign a deal.
At the same time, Alex, President Trump saying that he was ready to declare total victory over Iran, perhaps in the next 2 weeks. Let's check out this clip.
I think we are winning that battle, but you're really going to win it over the next 2 weeks when we declare total victory. It'll be a total victory. It'll happen very soon, and oil prices will come tumbling down.
So, Alex, perhaps a total victory in 2 weeks will be declared by the U.S. President Trump there after the Knicks game saying it could be a matter of days, maybe weeks. Let's check out that clip.
We have ongoing negotiations in Iran and with Iran, and that hasn't stopped. And we could have at least an idea by 1 or 2 days from now, but I think it's going well.
Did you say 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks?
2 or 3 days.
You'll be signing a peace agreement?
No, we have a good chance of doing it. We'll have a signed document that's actually stronger than doing the bombing.
And from everything that we've seen, I don't really suppose that this deal is likely. Quite the opposite. I think what we've seen now is a flare-up, which indicates that the war is not over, that you're likely to get back to situations where you have routine flare-ups. What you've seen with the other fronts in this war, with Gaza and with Lebanon and now with Iran, is that you've had multiple flare-ups, and this goes all the way back. If you go back to much earlier in the war, you'll remember that Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, who was one of the heads of the Hamas Politburo chief. He was in Tehran for the funeral of the Iranian president who went down in a helicopter crash, and Israel assassinated him in a IRGC protected complex inside Tehran when he came for that funeral. And shortly after that, you had the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah inside Beirut and his headquarters underground. That was just as Netanyahu was going to the United Nations to deliver his address. And then what did you have? You had, for the first time, Iranian strikes direct on Israel. It was the first time that happened. It was a major escalation because previously it was just a proxy war. The Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of them had been firing on Israel, but you never had ballistic missiles going directly from Iran to Israel. That was basically October in 2024. And then you had again in April, you had another flare-up where they sent ballistic missiles again. Remember that Israel, after that first ballistic missiles, they did a targeted strike where they hit some air defenses inside Iran just to demonstrate actually that they could attack so far away with the Air Force. That was a very successful attack, but it wasn't enough of a deterrent. We saw again several months later, Iran fired ballistic missiles. And then, of course, you had the 12-day war in which Israel struck against nuclear facilities for a period of 12 days. During those 12 days, Iran firing ballistic missiles back at Israel until the United States ended that with the Operation Midnight Hammer and the B-2 bombers hitting the Fordow nuclear reactor. And that was a major flare-up. But that wasn't the major flare-up until what we just had beginning in the end of February, which was a 6-week campaign with Operation Epic Fury led by the United States. Yes, did Trump end that? He did. He felt like, okay, 6 weeks was enough. The regime is still in place. We don't know if another several weeks is going to actually take out this regime. So let's cut our losses and let's see if we put enough pressure onto the Iranians to sign a deal. Now, what Netanyahu has always said throughout the conflict on all sides is that the only way you ever reach a negotiated settlement with your enemies is under fire. Trump hoped that the threat of fire would be enough, but as you see, it's not. Trump might have had a much better chance of getting to negotiated settlement if America and Israel were still firing. That's not the route that Trump chose. As a result, what do we see? That you're going to get to situations of additional flare-ups. What we're learning from this is that the war is not over. Additional flare-ups are likely. Iran has shown that it will not necessarily listen to the President of the United States, that they are an enemy of the President of the United States, and that Israel will not allow its security interests to be dictated even by a friendly president, even by President Trump. They will do what they feel is in their strategic interests, and it just makes it all the more likely that this threat, that this front of Iran becomes just like these other fronts, Hamas, Hezbollah, where you have major operations, you have temporary pauses, you have longer pauses, you have shorter operations, you have flare-ups, you have ceasefires, and then it goes again. So the likelihood here of additional flare-ups, additional military campaigns, I think actually went up by what just happened over the last 36 hours.
Alex, that being said, this morning it was running all over Israeli media, comments made by the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, basically saying a deal is going to happen whether Israel likes it or not. Let's check out this clip.
The Israelis and the United States, we have a lot of shared interests, but we also have some situations where our interests diverge. And I think where the president has been very clear here is that while Israel obviously has some objectives that it has, the United States' main objective in Iran is to ensure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. And we've actually, thanks to what's happened over the last few months, but really over the last year and a half, we've created the space necessary where the president believes, and I think that he's right, that we can get the long-term settlement to Iran's nuclear deal. Now, Israel may like that, they may not like that, but fundamentally, we think this is in the best interest of the United States of America.
Well, firstly, Alex, I would argue that Israel's top interest probably is, just like the United States, they don't want a nuclear Iran. But obviously, we have other interests as well, the ballistic missile threat, the regime in Iran. We don't want to pass this conflict down through the generations. What do you make of J.D. Vance's comments?
Well, I think what you see clearly here is that there are differences of opinion within the U.S. administration. We've heard reports, for example, that Secretary of State Marco Rubio was very instrumental in convincing the president that Israel had every right and even responsibility to strike back against Iran when Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel on Sunday night. And what you're seeing here is that J.D. Vance is of the other view that we don't need to be in this war. And I think that Vance is coming from this side, which is closer to what you'd call the isolationist camp in the United States. Vance has been rumored as being the one that's been lobbying the president to end the conflict earlier. One, maybe Rubio, Hegseth, certainly Mike Huckabee, who's the U.S. ambassador to Israel, you're pushing for greater U.S. military operations against Iran. And so you also have to wonder, what happens after this president. It was interesting that if you looked at that clip, and you saw in the B-roll that was running on the other side of the screen next to J.D. Vance, that was a meeting that took place just around New Year's at Mar-a-Lago, not at the White House. And President Trump was there, Marco Rubio was there, Hegseth was there, J.D. Vance wasn't there. And you didn't necessarily notice that in the clips. But I think that Vance is definitely not as close with Netanyahu as Trump and certainly as Rubio and Hegseth. Even though Prime Minister Netanyahu has tried to invest energy into that relationship, but you see that there are differing camps inside the administration, and that's why I think you're actually correctly pointing out over here that he's saying that the U.S. interest is not to have a nuclear Iran. That's also Israel's first interest. What other interest does Israel have aside from there not being a nuclear Iran and not having Iranian terror proxies attacking Israel? If Israel could get to a point where you don't have terror proxies on its borders attacking and they're not a threat to Israel, and Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, Israel doesn't have any problems. What's Israel's objectives here other than that? And what you see here is that Iran and its terror proxies have not only threatened Israel, but they continue to threaten the entire Middle East. Even just this week, again, striking at Bahrain, striking at Kuwait. We just even saw last night that there were Iraqi terror proxies affiliated with Iran that were striking at U.S. bases in Iraq. So this is a regime here in Iran that has destabilized the entirety of the Middle East. They've destabilized Iraq, they've destabilized Syria, they've destabilized Lebanon, they've destabilized Gaza, they destabilized Yemen. They're firing at the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Kuwait and Qatar and the Saudis. There was a missile from the Houthis in Yemen, which is a country destabilized by Iran that fell in Saudi Arabia on its way to Israel. They're blocking the international waterways of the Straits of Hormuz. Every objective that Israel has with relation to Iran should be a shared objective of the United States and all the other countries across the Middle East.
Alex, yes, as you said this morning, the Houthis firing at Israel, so that still continues, irregardless of what type of pause we're having with Iran right now. At the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu last night going on Israeli television saying if Iran resumes fire, Israel will use overwhelming force, perhaps enacting that plan, which was called back at the last minute.
ביממה האחרונה איראן וחיזבאללה ניסו לכפות עלינו משוואה חדשה. והמשוואה הזו היא בלתי נסבלת ובלתי מתקבלת על דעתי. הם חשבו שהם יירו משטח לבנון ואיראן על ישראל, ושאנחנו לא נפעל. זה לא קרה, וזה גם לא יקרה. לא במשמרת שלי.
Well, I think that Netanyahu is in a bind in the same way that Trump feels he's in a bind. You have to look very closely at the domestic considerations. You know, for President Trump, why is he backing off on the forcefulness that he demonstrated during the 6-week campaign? You know, he talked about being the end of the regime in Iran, saying to the Iranian people that their moment of freedom has arrived, and really pushing as hard as he could, I think, to get to a non-nuclear Iran and to an Iran that was run by different people. But what happened? The Iranians have, I think, employed a very clever strategy of firing at all of the other countries in the Middle East, whereby they are putting pressure on President Trump to stop the war, that Iran is closed the Straits of Hormuz, putting economic pressure on all of the countries in the Persian Gulf, as well as other countries around the world that rely on oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf, that Iran has threatened to hit on the energy infrastructure, and even did hit at some of the energy infrastructure of some of these countries that are around the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. So, you know, Iran demonstrating that they are, that they can use their leverage to put pressure on the president, and the president also with the domestic pressure of the, number one, of the fact that the war is not ultimately very popular. Certainly Democrats don't want there to be a war with Iran. Remember, Democrats were the ones pushing to give money to the Iranians. So that's exactly the opposite of an American military campaign. And then you've also got the folks on the more isolationist flank, let's say the MAGA side of the U.S. political spectrum in the Republican Party, that are saying, hey, we don't want wars in the Middle East. We don't want forever wars. And so Trump is under pressure to lower gas prices, to stop the war, because he's going toward a midterm election. Now, Netanyahu is going towards an election at the end of October, right? And if the war ends here and Iran even appears to be the victor, as strong, that they have dictated over the United States, that they are still rushing towards nuclear capacity, that they still have the highly enriched uranium, it looks like a failure for Netanyahu. So even though Netanyahu has to be, in some ways, I don't know if the right word, I don't want to say subservient, but you have to take like a deferent position towards the president of the United States, certainly because you would never have achieved what was accomplished in those 6 weeks of conflict without the United States. The prime minister still has to demonstrate that he is in charge of managing the war, and that he will continue the war until victory for Israel. This is a prime minister that talked about total victory, and certainly you're in a position where it's not total victory, right? Against Hamas is not total victory. Against Hezbollah, it's not total victory. And you see very clearly here against Iran, it's not total victory. So Netanyahu's got his own domestic considerations, and he's in a bit of a bind right here. You know, he has to demonstrate that Israel's responding with force. He has got to navigate that complicated relationship with President Trump, and also to demonstrate to the Israelis that he continues to be forceful and in control. And I will tell you that, you know, on Sunday night, you know, we had seen those first strikes by Iran, the first ballistic missiles, and there was only a few in the very beginning. And there was a lot of anxiety in Israel, not because Iran was firing ballistic missiles and that Israelis were going to have to duck into shelters. Israelis are willing to do that. The anxiety was over whether Netanyahu was going to respond. With, I would say, you know, all the people on the channels that, you know, I'm typically communicating with, all insisting Netanyahu has to respond. Netanyahu has to respond now. And this is part of the problem of dealing with these wars too, is that we are in this 24/7 multimedia, social media news cycle here, where everybody sees, number one, the ballistic missiles and the movements, and then they also see the tweets, through social posts, the media interviews, and also everybody, every commentator is also going in real time, on Telegram, on the WhatsApp groups, on X. Everybody's saying what needs to happen right this second. And and I was trying to convince some people that are very high level people, like, you have to wait. It doesn't just happen second by second, moment by moment. If Israel responds the next morning, it's the same thing as if they responded 3 hours or 5 hours earlier, right? So you've got all this anxiety around just what's going to happen right this second in ways that you've never had in any other kind of war or conflict in history.
No doubt, but I'll definitely concur with you that the Israeli people are willing to go down to the bomb shelters if it's for another week, another month, as long as this doesn't become a problem for generations. At the same time, this morning on Israeli radio 103 FM, Minister Miki Zohar saying that the next time Hezbollah fires at Israeli communities, we will take immediate action and strike once again in the Dahia there in Beirut. Let the Iranians test us again, he warned. He said that Netanyahu changed the rules, made it clear if Iran dares to harm us, we will take them apart. And actually, this morning, the IDF issuing evacuation orders for certain neighborhoods there in Lebanon ahead of possible strikes. So as you said before, this war is far from over, even though there's talk about a negotiation with Iran, a peace deal with Iran, whatever that means in the days or weeks ahead. But even today, after this 12-hour round, Israel already hinting, actually saving lives, by the way, telling people to evacuate. People criticize Israel all the time. Oh, look what you're doing. You're forcing people to evacuate. It's actually saving their lives, but that's beside the point. My point is that we're still striking at Lebanon and preparing to do so, even as we're speaking here.
Well, I think that is very important to understand. What's happened here is that Iran said that their escalation comes because Israel was attacking in Lebanon. And that post by Ambassador Leiter and others are trying to create the equation where Israel's battle against Lebanon has to have nothing to do with a U.S. ceasefire with Iran. Iran specifically using Lebanon and using Hezbollah as a forward-facing proxy to attack Israel, specifically for the purpose of trying to create a rift between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, right? So again, Trump wants there to be a ceasefire with Iran. Iran says, okay, we're not firing. They tell their proxy, hey, you guys just fire some drones, you fire some rockets against Israel, just test the water, see how far you can go, and then see what the Israeli response is going to be when Israel responds in full force against this terror entity, which is right on its doorstep. Then Iran says, well, if you attack Lebanon, if you attack Hezbollah, then we can't have a ceasefire. And not only that, if you strike in Beirut, where Hezbollah is headquartered, then we're going to attack. So that Trump turns around and says to Israel, the reason why Iran's shooting right now is because of you. So I think what Netanyahu is trying to do very cleverly right now, and this is part of how he manages wars, conflicts, administrations, is to decouple Israel's war with Hezbollah and the normalization talks between Israel and Lebanon from a ceasefire between the United States, which includes Israel, and Iran directly. And so you see that immediately in the aftermath when Israel says, okay, we won't launch that massive operation against Iran. We are going to escalate the attacks inside Lebanon. And when you talked about that evacuation warning, that was specifically in the city of Tyre, which is on the Mediterranean coast. And Tyre is a predominantly Christian city. And what you've seen happen there is that Hezbollah is actually operating now specifically inside a Christian city, because for a few reasons. Number one, because they think that Israel won't attack inside a Christian city. Why? Because the Lebanese government, like the President Ayoun, is a Christian. That's part of the way the Lebanese governing structure is set up, that the president always has to be a Christian. And if Israel is going to be negotiating with primarily the Christian faction in Iran, if Israel is attacking at the Christian city, then they're hoping that Ayoun will become angry at Israel and won't normalize, because the last thing Iran wants is for Israel to negotiate with the Lebanese government and to normalize with them.
And from a PR perspective, it looks bad when
Exactly.
Jews are striking against Christian sites.
Exactly.
They make it an international PR campaign against Israel. Look what we're doing to Christians in the Middle East. When the reality is Christians are thriving in Israel, by the way, more than they are in any other country in the Middle East.
Right, which is exactly one of the reasons why Israel's telling the Christians, listen, we have to operate here. You understand why. Get out of your homes, because we don't want you to die. What we want to do is clear out the terrorist infrastructure, because we have seen over and over again that Hezbollah, they, just like Hamas, they build tunnels underground. They're using private homes as storehouses for weapons and for rockets. In addition, they can also be using schools and other public facilities. So, Israel has to, dance very carefully, move civilian populations out of the way in order to fight against terrorists. Now, inside Lebanon, it's a little bit different than the situation in Gaza. In Gaza, the population and Hamas are almost synonymous. There's no real opposition to Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. They're all Sunni Muslims. They've all voted for Hamas. All their family members are part of Hamas. When Israel takes out the top leadership and the mid leadership of Hamas, just new people from Gaza just take the ranks and pick up the guns. Inside Lebanon, you've got a different situation in which Hezbollah is a Shiite terror organization. The Shiites in Iran do support Hezbollah, but they're only about a third of the country. About approximately a third of the country is Sunni Muslim, but they don't support Hezbollah. And a third of that country is Christian, and they certainly don't support Hezbollah. So, it's in the best interest of the Christians and the Sunnis in Lebanon that Israel will actually further weaken Hezbollah.
Alex, never a dull moment. Never a dull moment in this country, for better or for worse. Certainly not a dull moment, especially not in the last 2.5 years, ever since we started this latest round from the October 7th massacre till we are today. No doubt we're in a much stronger position, and hopefully we will continue to expand these operations in order to quell this threat against us, whether Hezbollah, whether Hamas, whether Iran, all these threats. And of course, stay tuned to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. This has been a special edition. Josh Haston here, correspondent for JNS News, along with Alex Trayman, CEO. Make sure you check out all the amazing content provided by JNS TV. Give us a super thanks, subscribe, and more now than ever, really, go to jns.org for the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV.